So then, tyres. Probably the single most important thing in RC. They're the bit that's touching the ground, the bit that turns, the bit that does everything, basically. The tyres have so much in them. It's not just a case of chucking someone out of a packet and going, yeah, that's perfect, and then just looking at all the rest of your car. If you can find something in the tyres, you're going to gain so much time compared to what you're going to find in your car, because you've got the potential to just gain grip, gain overall acceleration, cornering, everything all in one thing. So without further ado, let's break down tyres and get into some ways that you can really maximise what you get out of them. So the first element to tyres is picking the right ones, getting the right tyres for the surface that you're on. So if we first think about carpet and AstroTurf, where do you start with sort of picking the right tyres if it's not a controlled tyre meeting already? So the main thing that I would look at with carpet or AstroTurf is the length of the pile of the Astro or carpet, whatever it is. And you want to almost match that to the length of the pin that is on your tyre. And when you do that, that's usually what gives you the best performance. So, for example, if you know like AstroTurf tracks in the UK, some of you might not, but Boughton has an extremely long pile of Astro. And historically on that, when it was sort of mini darts and things from Schumacher, they didn't work particularly well, and everyone had to use the ballistic buggy pins because they had super long spikes on just to dig into that Astro. And the theory is, like I just said, the longer the Astro is, the longer spike you need to get all the way down into the Astro and produce as much grip as you can. You're not really working off friction as much on Astro or carpet. You're more working on digging spikes into a surface, creating that sort of lock-in effect and giving you the drive forward. So it's a little bit different in that regard. When you're then on a more shorter pile AstroTurf with sort of really small, fine Astro, if you were to run a longer spike on that, since not all of the spike can go into the ground, it feels like the car's kind of walking around on the top of the track. It's not like the car is responsive, and it just feels very weird to drive and usually doesn't have as much grip. So a smaller pile, you can get away with a smaller spike. That's going to then go all the way into the Astro, isn't going to fold around as much as a longer spike, and it's probably going to give you more grip. And that even does translate over to carpet. So for example, the MKGP carpet, a lot of you will know, a little bit longer and deeper than EOS carpet, and that allows the mezzo to actually work quite well on that carpet because it's got the longer spikes than a cactus. It works pretty well. So that's usually how I'd go about sort of choosing the tyres with Astro and carpet. Dirt, obviously, I don't have much experience. From the experience I do have, dirt is all about getting the friction on the ground. You're not necessarily digging into the dirt unless it's a really, really loose, sort of dusty, muddy track. If it's very sort of smooth and hard packed, you're just trying to create as much friction between the tyre and the ground as you can. So if it's a very not dusty scenario, it's smooth, no dust, that's where you see like the slick tyres in the States, because there's no dust. That's what's going to create the most contact between the ground and the surface of the tyre is a slick tyre. So that's where that comes in. If you're on a track that's a lot more dusty, a bit more broken up, you might want to try some more sort of web style tyres or pin tyres, and things like that, because they're going to dig through the dirt and then create that friction again against the surface. So that's kind of mainly thinking about rear tyres there. Then it comes to matching a front tyre to that rear tyre. So how do we go about that? Well, usually a very good place to start is if the manufacturer does a front tyre that matches the rear tyre that you're using, that's usually a great place to start. The reason for that is that that's going to give your car balance and predictability. You're going across different surfaces, landing jumps, and the amount of force into the tyres is changing. It's going to respond in the same way at the front and rear and be as predictable to drive as it can be. A lot of the time, especially in the UK, we don't always have front tyres that match the rear tyres, or sometimes, a lot of the time, that's just not the case. So how do you go about choosing the tyres in that scenario? Well, again, you've got the same goal at the end of the day. You want to have the feeling of balance between the front and the rear. So again, if you can try and choose a tyre that has a similar sort of tread, similar sort of tread depth and compound, that's going to help you because it's going to keep consistency between front and rear. Sometimes though, that isn't the case. You've kind of got scenarios like two-wheel drive on Astro especially, where you're going to be much better off running a really small, fine front tyre to go with your big pin rear tyre. And that's just obviously you're keeping the weight down, keeping the diameter of the tyre down, makes the car nimble and faster. And often, like the rear tyre, the manufacturer just doesn't do a front tyre that's remotely similar to the rear tyre. So you've got to just try all the options and see what's going on. So mainly when it's that kind of scenario, so like outdoors on Astro, you're using mezzos, it comes down to experience what front tyre is going to be the best for you. And the trouble is, it's hard to say which ones are more aggressive or less aggressive, because it massively depends what type of Astro you're on, what type of carpet you're on, sort of the size of the track, the speed you go, and things like that are all going to make a very big difference to which tyres feel like they do. But again, generally, you can sort of think about it, especially when it comes to Astro again outdoors, you can think about the length of the Astro and you try the tyre and think, right, I want more front end grip. I'm on a track that's a really deep pile of Astro. It is probably going to be the case that a rib tyre, something like a cut stagger, which has got the biggest sort of blocks on it, on a deep Astro, is going to give you the most amount of front end traction. So at the Nationals this year with the longer pile Astros, most people were running the cut stagger tyres to get the most front end grip that they could. When you're on a more fine Astro, you can again think the same thing. You're probably going to have the most steering if you run something like the Proline front, the Fusion front, Splint or something like that. Fine pins on fine Astro, that's going to turn like crazy. And then if you want less, then you can go to the block sort of ribbed cut stagger style tyre. So again, you can think of it that way. Carpet is a little bit easier because once you've tried it once, it's going to be more similar on most tracks. But again, you're just going for that balance for the rear. If you can't get the balance by literally having balanced tyres, you've just got to figure out for you, see what people are running, see what sort of the top guys are using, the people that are doing well are using, the people that know the track. Really have a look at all of that, get a gist for it, try some things, and just make sure you've got a balanced set of tyres on your car that's offering you the most grip that you can get. Thinking about the compound, usually for Astro or carpet, it's pretty self-explanatory. There's usually only one compound that's kind of just what you use, one that you'd use in the wet, one you'd use in the dry. It's kind of pretty simple. But going on to dirt, again, we don't have much experience, but from when we raced 8 scale and did a bit of that, it's more with the softer and harder compounds. The way that you know that your tyre's too soft is it feels like the whole car is just unstable. It's almost like sort of jelly going through the corners. You just feel like it's unpredictable. You don't know where it's going to go. And you can kind of just feel the whole thing moving around and just almost feeling like the suspension's really soft, but it's just the tyres sort of giving you a wobbly effect. If you run tyres that are too hard, everything feels fine, you just have no grip basically, and you're probably just slow compared to what you could be with a softer tyre. So again, it's getting that balance of sort of consistency and having feel in the car and having soft enough tyres to have traction. Quick note, we have managed to adjust the sort of option parts section of our website, so we can now send all of those bits to over 40 countries. So previously it was just the UK, now it can go to the USA, most of Europe, Australia, pretty much anywhere in the world. So things on there like the piston flaps we've got where you can adjust the compression and rebound in the shocks, which quite a lot of people are running. You can get those anywhere now. We might do a video on a few of these things soon enough. But yeah, check the link in the description, check that out. Back to the video. The next part is making sure that your tyres are in the right sort of window where they're working the best. So again, we'll start off thinking about carpet and Astro. You've got a pin tyre digging into a pile. When it's going to have the most traction is in its first run, usually where it's got the corners on the spikes. That's giving it the most sort of dig and the most drive in those scenarios. So quite often how it feels with a tyre like that is the first run where you've still got the corners on the spikes and everything. That is going to be the ultimate peak of grip. Then when those corners wear off the spikes a little bit, it kind of comes down to a second level. So the corners on the spikes are rounded. but you've got those spikes there. And then what happens is the spike kind of stays the same shape, but it just gets shorter and shorter and shorter for a while. So quite often you can get away with the first run is the best, then you sort of drop down to the second level, and sometimes you get 3 or 4 runs sort of at that level before you hit sort of the cliff point of the tyre. And that's when the pin is just so short that it's basically not digging into anything, and you just have no grip left at the end of the day, and the tyre is like fully spent. So that's why you often see at nationals or big meetings, the top drivers using a setter run, things like that. It's because that first run where you've got the corner on the tyres does have a little bit more grip than the sort of second, third, fourth run where you're just wearing down that spike with the corner taken off it. So you can get away with a good few runs sort of just until the spike is too short and you feel that, right, I've seriously got no grip now. That's when you're going to be losing quite a lot of time. So that's kind of how it feels like it works with the pin tyres. Obviously, you replace the tyres at the point where, however competitive you want to be, you know that the new is going to be faster, and you kind of just replace to however competitive you want to be, how much money you want to spend. So, yeah, moving on to sort of the dirt tyres, surfaces where you're sort of just creating friction against the surface. That can often be quite different, where sometimes it's not always the first run that has the most grip. It can be that when you're sort of trying to create friction, you can actually have slightly more traction where the corners are sort of gone off the tyres and they're just able to, instead of running on the corners, you're running on the flat section, and that's going to give you the most sort of just friction and grip in those scenarios. I've only ever done one race meeting on slick, so again, it's hard to say, but I'm pretty sure sometimes that the first run maybe isn't the best. The tyres have to break in a little bit, and then you get a window of runs where your tyres are going to be the most competitive, produce the most amount of grip until they drop off again. So in those scenarios, again, that's just going to come from experience, running that tyre on that surface. Again, it's a case of asking the locals, asking the top drivers, see what they're doing, and just figuring out from there. Another thing to watch out for is running tyres on different days. So we've noticed, especially on carpet, that if we run tyres, say one weekend, even if you just do sort of one run and then you wait a week and then you run them the next weekend, it feels like, at least for a few laps, you have way less grip than you normally would. And I'm not sure they ever quite get back to the point where they have the same grip that they did before. So I think that's definitely something to watch out for. I think if you really want to be competitive on a day, it's best if those tyres were like new on that day at some point. Because it seems like, I don't know whether the surface sort of hardens over the time that they're just sat there not being used or what happens, but we've definitely noticed, we don't really notice it on Astro, but on carpet we definitely feel that if you run tyres, leave them for a bit and then try and run them again, they just don't seem to have the same grip. The next part is how you can modify the tyres that you've got on to go faster. So the first thing I'm going to think about in this section is sidewall glue. So this is something you see a lot of people doing nowadays. But why do we run sidewall glue, especially on the front tyres? Usually in higher grip scenarios, things like that. Basically, it just makes the car easier to drive, less edgy, and much less prone to traction roll or grip roll. So what happens? You put glue on the sidewall. As your car is leaning over in a corner, you're going to be touching more and more of the glue, and as the tyre deforms and folds under, the tyre is going to start running on that glue and it's going to lose grip. So by the time you get too far leant over, that tyre is going to lose grip and forgive the car, allow it to understeer and just allow you to carry on your merry way. So that's kind of the reason for running the sidewall glue, particularly in higher speed corners as well. Again, where the tyre's deforming, you're moving onto the glue, it can make the car less edgy there too. Now, on different types of tyres, you're going to maybe want a different amount for certain reasons. So some tyres are going to deform more than others, fold under more. So it feels like you don't want to put too much glue on those, otherwise it just feels like you lose a lot of steering, a lot of front end. Other tyres, the tread is quite high in the middle compared to the outside. The tyre doesn't deform that much. It feels like you can put loads of glue on and get away with it. And also depends how much sort of natural traction that the tyre produces. So thinking about like the Mezzo front tyre that we often run on the 4-wheel drive outdoors on Astro, we found that running the glue almost all the way up to the pins is the best, because you've still got the pins in the middle, the highest point of the tyre. They're really what you want to be using to produce the grip. And then the sidewall, you basically just turn into an area that just slides, so that as soon as the car is sort of leaning at any point or catching bumps like this, it's just sliding over the bumps like that. But you've still got all the drive from the pins in the middle. You've still got plenty of steering, because you can pretty much have as much steering out of a big pin front tyre like that as you want to by leaving more or less rows on, which we'll get to in a minute. And yeah, it is just different for different front tyres. So again, backtracking a little bit, how do you get the right amount of glue on the tyres? So if you haven't got enough glue, your car's still going to be too edgy. So you can basically keep adding glue until you get to the point where you may notice it in the lower speed corners first, or maybe the higher speed corners. You'll just feel like you don't have enough front end, basically. Your car will feel a little bit dead to drive, a little bit unresponsive, and you'll be like, it just needs livening up a little bit. That could indicate that you have too much glue on. Not enough is you've still got traction roll, you've still got an edgy feeling in the car, you want it to calm down. That's when you can add glue to the sidewall of the tyre and just make everything a little bit easier. The next thing to think about is cutting off rows of tyres, which I just sort of mentioned about before. This mainly happens on 4-wheel drive when you're running a spiked front tyre, something like that. And the reason to do that is just to plain reduce the amount of front end traction that your car has. It can be the case that with the big pin front tyres on 4-wheel drive, that you're just overpowering the rear tyres. No matter what you do, the front end just completely overpowers the rear end. So what we often do in that scenario is with something like a Mezzo on Outdoor Astro, we're usually cutting off two rows inside and outside, sometimes 3 rows outside, 2 rows inside, that kind of area, just to basically literally reduce traction from the front end, because it's just too hard to drive otherwise. So yeah, it's pretty self-explanatory really. The more you cut off, the less grip you're going to have, and it just makes it easier to drive. This can get a little bit complicated, where often you're just trimming the outer rows off and you keep coming in until you sort of thinnen the row of spikes you've got left in the middle. Some people like to cut patterns in their front tyres, cut kind of like a triangle shape, or cut like the chevron, what people used to call it. We've never found a huge advantage in that. It must obviously work because a lot of people get on with it. It's won a European Championships with weird patterns in the front tyres, so it obviously works well. But we've always found that it's better off to just run the narrow tread, and if you can run glue on the sidewall, keep the tread narrow and just glue higher up the tyre, which obviously doing that allows you to do. So we've liked doing that with the Mezzo front tyres particularly. You can also obviously cut pins off the rear tyres as well. Usually avoid that unless it is a scenario where you're sort of bound to using a front tyre that just has way less traction than the rear tyre, and you can't do anything to get more rotation, you just need more rotation badly. Then you can sort of resort to cutting pins off the rear tyres. But usually at the point you're doing that, you're just losing overall traction, and again, you might be losing overall time. And the other thing that you can do for the dirt guys is obviously sourcing the tyres, and I know that's super, super important in America. Obviously, I basically have no experience doing that, but I know that's something that you've really got to get right when you're racing on, especially the smooth, sort of slick tyre dirt racing over there in the States. So the reason I believe that works is that you're not softening the entire carcass of the tyre like just running a softer tyre. You're only softening the part which comes into contact with the ground. So you get the best of both worlds from what I talked about with the compounds before. You've got a stiff carcass that's going to provide you with sort of consistency and not make your car feel like it's wobbling and really loose and odd on the track. But you're going to have a soft surface to create the most friction and sort of reaction with the ground that you can. So yeah, you get more grip still with the consistency. So aside from that, there's not much more I can say. Obviously, again, it's going to be a similar thing where if you don't know, you've got to just try and learn off people, get experience, try different things. If you can, do a bit of testing, see what's working best for you. And yeah, but The most important thing really is just with tyres, you've got to keep trying things, because if you can find something in the tyres, you're going to find something quite big. You're going to find more time than you could probably find in your car. That brings us to the end of the video, so I hope you've really enjoyed it. I hope you've learned something again. And yeah, if you've got any ideas for videos that you really want to see, put them in the comments down below. Tell us what you think about tyres, what you found. And yeah, we'll see you in the next one.